Welcome back. We are in our second session and we are talking about the psychodynamic concepts. And in the concern for psychodynamic concepts, there are four basically schools of thought which we need to understand. And those four schools of thought, which are part of actually psychotherapy, are psychodynamic, CBT, humanistic approach, and systemic approach. So let's watch this particular lecture to better understand that how these schools of thought are actually associated with one another.
When most people think about psychotherapy, they think of it as being this one thing. That it's pretty clear how we see psychopathology, what we're talking about when we're talking about therapy. But in fact, you could technically say that there are as many approaches to psychotherapy as there are psychotherapists. More generally though, there are four approaches to psychotherapy, four schools of psychotherapy that are generally scientifically recognized in most countries. And today I would like to introduce you to those four schools. Those four approaches to psychotherapy that are generally recognized are the psychodynamic approach, the cognitive behavioral approach, the humanistic approach, and the systemic approach. The reason why I think you should know about those different approaches is that therapy is not one clear-cut thing that fits everyone, but there are many different ways of seeing the human mind, of seeing human behavior, of seeing how we become the people we are, and especially how we can change, how we get out of a depression, out of anxiety. And I think in particular those four approaches, they really shine a light on how complex as human beings we are. So let's start with the first one, and that is the psychodynamic approach. This approach is the oldest and is the one that actually started the whole trajectory of psychopathology as we know it today. There was Sigmund Freud who developed his psychoanalytic theory, and based on that, the treatment approach to psychoanalysis. I made a whole video about psychodynamic therapy and theory, so if you would like to get more detailed information about that, check out the video. While Sigmund Freud is the father and founder of this school, his followers, or whoever still practices psychodynamic theory today, took his approach in many different ways. And some of it adhered more closely to his assumptions and what he thought was true, while others completely abandoned some of his, most basic theories and gave it their own twist. You might already seen on my channel that I did a few videos about Alfred Adler, who would also be considered a psychodynamic psychotherapist, but in many ways he's completely different from Freud. So if you think that psychodynamic approach and Sigmund Freud is one and the same thing, not really. The one thing that all psychodynamic approaches share is that they're focused on development. So they will always try to see how exactly did the psychopathology come to be? How did you become the person that you are today? What happened in your childhood that made you the person you are today? Second of all, they are very much focused on the unconscious. So they think that you are not just driven by things you know and things you're aware of, but that there are a lot of things that you don't know, maybe have forgotten, maybe have repressed, that actually guide your behavior, thoughts, and emotion in very important ways. In psychodynamic psychotherapy, there is also a big focus on emotion and relationships, especially the relationship between the therapist and the patient. They have the concepts called transference and countertransference. So transference would be all the things that the patient projects onto the therapist, and countertransference is everything that the therapist projects onto the patient. This is not super clear-cut terminology, so I'm sorry for every psychodynamic therapist out there who might not be satisfied with this, but I try to make it simple. Working with transference and countertransference in therapy is very crucial because it can reveal some of the unconscious patterns that are happening in the patient's life. When we talk about emotions and especially relationship that is important in the psychodynamic approach, I also have to mention the object-relational approach. That is a movement within the psychodynamic approach that emphasizes attachment. So they ask, how do we attach to others? How do we attach to our primary caregivers? And how do we attach to people in the here and now? I'm pretty sure all of you have heard about being avoidant, being anxious, being secure, This kind of theory, this attachment style, originated within the psychodynamic approach. The next school of psychotherapy that I would like to talk about is the cognitive behavioral approach. And technically you would have to say it's cognitive and behavioral therapies, because originally those used to be two, well, more or less independent fields, and they kind of got together to form this cognitive behavioral therapy. Behavior therapy was particularly developed out of learning theory. It was very closely related to animal research. Maybe you remember Pavlov and the dog, maybe you know about Skinner. There are a few other theorists who used a lot of animals in their research to demonstrate how learning functions actually. And by the way, if you're a psychology student, you might want to know those different researchers and the animals that they use, because this is quite the common exam question. They developed models of animal learning and applied those to psychopathology. One of the most famous figures in cognitive behavioral therapy is Beck, who in 1976 developed a theory where he integrated behavioral and cognitive theories to treat depression. After a while, it also became pretty clear that it's not just cognitive or behavioral mechanisms, but there are also emotions, interpersonal factors that affect a person and play into the cards of psychopathologies. While in psychodynamic theory and therapy, it's a lot about where's this coming from? Why is this the way it is? Where did this problem originate? It's a lot of question and etiology. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, it's much more about maintenance. So the question is not really why is this patient depressed, even though of course they ask this and they try to establish where the depression came from, but it's much more important to understand why is the patient still depressed? What are the factors that keep the depression active and running, and why can the patient not get out of the depression? In cognitive behavioral therapy, there is usually somewhat less of a focus on the relationship between the patient and the therapist. That does not mean that it's cold or it doesn't matter at all. It's still important, but not as important as within other approaches. That means cognitive behavioral therapy is perfect for self-help. I mean, I'm pretty sure you read a self-help book at some point in your life where you learned about one or another CBT mechanism. And CBT, by the way, if I have not said that before, is the way we abbreviate cognitive behavioral therapy. The goal is always to create new learning experiences. So we want to take an old learning pattern and we want to replace it with something new and better for the client. And the way that CBT does that is through behavioral and cognitive forms. For example, a behavioral form would be exposure therapy. If you have a client who is afraid of spiders, you will expose the client to the spider. If you have a client who's terribly afraid of elevators, you will take the client to an elevator. Of course, there are different steps that you follow in this kind of exposure protocol, but this is basically the mechanism. You want the client to learn that they do not have to be afraid. You want to give them a new learning experience, that elevators or spiders are not that bad. A behavioral form to treat depression, for example, is behavioral activation. Depressive people tend to just stop doing basically everything. They have very, very little positive experiences in their life because they do not go out anymore. They stop enjoying food. They do not meet up with friends. They do not go into nature. They do not watch films anymore. Whatever they used to like before, they don't do that anymore. So with behavioral activation, they try to actively get the client back into doing things and being active. Because most of the time, if you start doing things again, not in the first try, maybe not in the second try, maybe not even third, but maybe the fourth time they go out and meet friends again, they will start enjoying it again. And this is actually a mechanism that works really well for depression. Cognitive forms of treatment in the cognitive behavioral approach are, for example, testing. You test predictions, you test thoughts you have through experiments. So you might always have the pattern that you think, nobody likes me. I will always be chosen last. People will never choose me first. I'm a failure, and you have this kind of prediction that no matter what you do, you will be rejected and it's not going to work. And then maybe you try on a different kind of thought. Maybe you're, well, maybe, you know, I'm not that bad. Maybe I could do this little experiment just to see how I react. Maybe new thoughts come up. Maybe people react differently. So you basically take your thoughts, predictions, and you test them first on your own, in your own little world, in your own head, and then you take them out into the real world and test them there. And I mean, not that surprisingly, most of the time your thoughts and predictions are too catastrophic and they're not true. Another very important part of cognitive behavioral therapy are homework assignments. It might feel a bit like you're back at school, but it's very important. Therapy is not just the 1 hour you have in the week, but everything else that happens in between. And you can think of cognitive behavioral therapy a bit like you learn the grammar and you learn vocabulary, but to really know the language, you have to use it and practice it every day. And that's what the homework assignments are for. The next approach I would like to introduce you to is the Humanistic Approach. The big name here is Carl Rogers. He's often seen as the founder of this theoretical approach. It was developed in the 1950s and is kind of called the third force because it's the third big one after the psychodynamic and the cognitive behavioral approach. And by the way, fun fact, in Japan it's actually known as the first force because it was introduced to Japan before the psychodynamic and the cognitive behavioral approach. Actually, the school of humanistic psychotherapy is more of an umbrella term. There are a lot of little different schools that belong to the humanistic approach. There's the client-centered or person-centered approach, Gestalt, psychodrama, existential, also new experiential and emotion-focused approaches. And while all of them have different focuses, they share the notion that a human cannot fully understand by the learning and the developmental conflicts. They believe in a very positive view of seeing humanity. They believe that every human being has the innate need and wish to grow and self-actualize. Experiencing yourself and your emotion in therapy is very crucial for them, and unconditional positive regard and empathy from the therapist towards the client, especially in the person-centered approach, is absolutely central. They think that human wisdom is more than the intellect alone. That means when you have tested experiences, they can be a very important guide as to what might be going on inside of you while you try to get back on track to keep growing, keep evolving, and keep self-actualizing. So as you can probably guess from that, the relationship is incredibly crucial. It's not just a tool to apply other techniques, but the relationship itself is the healing factor in the humanistic approach. In the psychodynamic approach, you might see the therapist as some kind of expert, because I mean, they also interpret what you bring to them. They might even be interpreting your dreams if that's what you wish. Sometimes in cognitive behavioral therapy, the therapist can be seen as more of a coach. And in the humanistic approach, the expert really is the client. The client can tell what exactly he or she is feeling. The client can tell exactly what is happening inside of them in that very moment. And this is not the therapist role. The next school of therapy is the systemic approach, or also called the family-centered approach. This was developed in the late 1960s to early 1970s. And of course, all of these approaches are still developing and they're still coming up with new theories, testing the old theories. So it's not like, you know, the development stopped there, but this is where they started. And especially with the systemic approach, it's very interesting because they didn't originate from a theory. So for example, with the psychodynamic approach, first you have Freud's psychoanalytic theory that then he bases a treatment on. With the cognitive behavioral therapy, first you have behavioral theories and cognitive theories that are then translated into treatment. But with the systemic approach, they started practicing with families, and they borrowed a lot of theories from the cognitive behavioral approach and from the psychodynamic approach. But after a while, they realized that none of these approaches could really grasp the full complexity of what it means to have different generations, multiple people in your office. So they started developing their own theories. They think that human behavior is not just controlled by intrapersonal forces, for example, the intrapsychic conflict, classical or operant conditioning, actualization of potentialities, but that there are also very complex and sometimes very subtle interpersonal processes. And they're called systemic because while they deal with a system, that means there are multiple elements that act upon one another and are acted upon by another. We often see our words or what we say only as a reaction to something that someone else said, but at the same time, it's something that evokes a reaction from the other person. That means that each person's behaviors is part of this web of elements, and the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. And because the interaction between the different people is so important, communication is absolute key. And it's not just what is said or what is not being said, but also how something is said. How do the different people interact with one another? Because in the end, no matter what system you look at, it always has a sort of, in this case, psychological equilibrium. That means it's a certain steady state that they want to maintain. And in a family, I mean, you can imagine 100 things that can challenge this equilibrium. For example, if you have a teenager who's demanding more independence, if a new child is born, if the family has to move, there are a lot of different challenges that a family has to go through where this equilibrium is challenged. And sometimes that's a very good thing. Sometimes the equilibrium should be challenged and it should change. But those are oftentimes the moments when a couple or a family or an organization comes to therapy. And I mean, you can imagine how complex and how difficult this can be. One professor of mine once shared with us that he was in therapy with 9 people. It was a family of 9, everyone from baby to grandmother was there. And I mean, it's not just logistically very challenging to have 9 or, well, with therapists, 10 people in a room, but also understanding all the different dynamics and making space for everyone. And because it's not just that there is a certain dynamic always between 2 people, so that already multiplies, but also every person in themselves has an own inner monologue going on. And having a grasp on this, that's quite the challenge. In order to work with families, a lot of family therapists or systemic therapists will avoid talking about problems because that very quickly leads to scapegoating. There's always like one black sheep in a family, but they rather phrase things as worries. They would not ask, oh, what is the problem you come to therapy with? But they would ask every person, what are you worried about? Also, whenever a whole family comes to therapy, it's very likely that there's at least one person who did not want to go to therapy. And it's the systemic therapist's job to especially make contact with that person. Also, of course, within this approach, there are many different individual schools, but actually in the systemic approach, it's a little less about individual schools by now and more about different protocols. But that would be too much for this video. So just know that also within this approach, there's a lot of diversity. Of course, within the systemic approach, one of the big things is also couples therapy. There's especially one approach which is called emotion-focused couples therapy, which was started by Leslie Greenberg. And for example, in this approach, there are 3 main tasks. First, there's the de-escalation of negative cycles. So you want to get a couple out of the same old fights, out of the same old behavior. Next, you want to restructure the interactional positions towards secure connection. So here you again get a little taste of that psychodynamic attachment theory. Because, I mean, if you have the interaction that one person always wants more and the other person feels more intimidated and moves back, well, then you have an anxious attachment and an avoidant attachment, to be very bluntly, and you need to bring both of them back to secure connection. And last but not least, you need to consolidate and integrate what they learned. So now it may seem like there are 4 completely different schools who can be very different from one another, even though of course there are also a lot of similarities. But actually, most psychotherapists, I would say, work in an integrative manner, which means that they integrate various theories, various methods, various techniques from different schools into their therapy. That's why in the beginning I said that technically there are as many psychotherapy approaches as there are psychotherapists, because everyone has their own very special mix. What I want you to take away from this video is that there's not one clear, true, the one and only approach or way of thinking about psychopathology, how people become to be who they are, how you can treat psychopathologies. And I think seeing this diversity of approaches really makes you appreciate how complex as human beings we actually are, and how it's good that we have these different approaches, so that not just every therapist finds an approach that they identify with, because if you do not identify with the way they see humans and psychopathologies, it's going to be very difficult for you to, and also for the client, there might be a particular way that they would like to be seen as, or that they also see themselves and their problem or worries as. So I hope that you can see that there's not one truth, but there's a wonderfully rich and diverse field of theories and approaches out there that you can choose from. In the end, any attempt that was made to make one theory or one kind of therapy superior to the other, and that was the case with cognitive behavioral therapy for a long time, it has not really worked. The scientific feedback, the scientific results were always that, well, of course, cognitive behavioral therapy is wonderful kind of therapy. It's scientifically very proven and very well validated, but the others as well. My personal opinion is that no, not one single approach should be superior in general to one or the other. They can be superior for individuals. For example, you might say, oh, well, actually, I like the humanistic approach, or I like the psychodynamic approach, or well, cognitive behavioral theory really is my thing, or no, I would like to go to a systemic therapist. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to be notified as soon as I upload the next one. Thank you so much.
Okay, Ji, thank you very much for watching and for your whole attention. I believe that you have listened to this clip very carefully, because the lady was talking about in a very good manner what psychodynamic approach is, what CBT approach is, what humanistic approach is, and what systematic approach is all about. So as we have come to know that human development is not that simple all the time. There are so many complexities associated with human interaction and human development. As the inner world of the leaders, when we talk about the inner world of the leaders, your author has used a very interesting term, and that is inner theater. Okay, like the Shakespeare once said कि ये दुनिया एक स्टेज की मानिंद है जिसमें हम सब किरदार हैं, and हम अपना किरदार परफॉर्म करने स्टेज पर आते हैं. We do our role on the stage and then we leave the stage. Okay, so this world, this whole phenomena, which is considered in terms of the Shakespeare taken up as the outside world, हमारे पास एक और world भी exist कर रही है, which is the inner world of the leaders, and there is some inner theater. एक उसके अपने मन के अंदर एक पूरी stage drama जो है वो चल रहा है, जिसमें एक basic script है, जिस स्क्रिप्ट के मुताबिक उसको अपने मामलात को लेकर चलना है, अपने फॉलोअर्स को लेकर चलना है, उसके विजनरी कॉन्टेक्स्ट वहां से डेवलप करना है. सो वो जो बेसिक स्क्रिप्ट है जिसके गिर्द उस लीडर की सारी थॉट्स वो मूव कर रही हैं, एक्चुअली वो बेसिक स्क्रिप्ट उसका उसी साइकोडायनामिक पर्सपेक्टिव में डेवलप हुआ है जिसको हम डिस्कस करने यहाँ पर आज मौजूद हैं. एट द सेम टाइम देयर वुड बी सर्टेन कोर conflictual relationship themes developing, और वो core conflictual relationship themes वो दो different लोगों के दरमियान, जैसे कि लीडर एंड फॉलोअर है, उन दोनों के दरमियान जो आपस में तजाद हैं, जो आपस में conflicts हैं, वो उसकी वजह से evolve करते हैं. And obviously लीडर को उन conflicts के बारे में बहुत sensitive रहना है, because वो conflicts अगर appropriately manage हो गए तो they would be the functional one, लेकिन अगर वो appropriate manage ना हो पाए तो they would be taking the shape of dysfunctional context. इसी तरह जब हम नीड सिस्टम की बात करेंगे तो उस नीड के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में भी लीडर की भी नीड्स एंड वांट्स हैं, फॉलोअर्स की भी नीड्स एंड वांट्स हैं, तो वी हैव टू बी वेरी मच विजिलेंट, वी हैव टू बी वेरी मच एजाइल टू नो कि वो तमाम नीड्स एंड वांट्स जो हैं वो किस तरीके से आपस में इंटरेक्ट कर सकती हैं, वो तमाम नीड्स एंड वांट्स किस तरीके से एक दूसरे को ओवरलैप कर सकती हैं, कहां पर हमें किस इकदाम की जरूरत है. सो दैट इज ऑल द कंसर्न्स जो कि उस लीडर के इनर वर्ल्ड के साथ भी एसोसिएटेड वो होंगे. इसी तरह ये बात भी याद रखिएगा कि चाहे वो लीडर हो या फॉलोअर हो, ऑल बिहेवियर हैज एन एक्सप्लेनेशन. हर एक रिएक्शन के बैकएंड के ऊपर कोई ना कोई रीजन, लॉजिक, रैशनैलिटी वो एग्जिस्ट करेगी. तो वी नीड टू नो कि व्हाई, व्हेन, वेयर, हाउ, व्हाट समबडी हैज डन. Likewise, we have to be very much careful at the same time about the blind spots which all of us are having. This blind spot discussion would be discussed in our next slide when we talk about Johari Window. And in Johari Window we'll come to know कि हम सब की ज़ात में मुख्तलिफ खिड़कियाँ हैं जो कि अपना अपना रोल अदा कर रही हैं. Sometimes we have open windows, sometimes we have blind spots, sometimes we have hidden aspects of our life and our concerns. So हमें ये देखना पड़ेगा कि वो कौन से ऐसे aspects हैं जो कि हमें किसी चीज़ के जानने में अंधा कर रहे हैं, वो कौन से ऐसे एस्पेक्ट्स हैं जो हमारे लिए मायोपिया क्रिएट कर रहे हैं. सो व्हाट आर द ब्लाइंड स्पॉट्स? द लीडर मस्ट बी सेंसिटिव अबाउट दीज थिंग्स. लाइकवाइज हर शख्स के साथ एसोसिएटेड उसकी सेट ऑफ इमोशंस हैं, सेट ऑफ एक्सपीरियंसेस हैं। हम लाइफ में एक बहुत बड़ी गलती अभी तक करते ही आए हैं कि हमने एक लीडर को एक मुजस्मा बनाकर अपने सामने रख दिया है और उसकी पूजा करते रहते हैं। हम ये नहीं समझते कि लीडर भी एक इंसान है, उसके भी जज्बात हैं, उसके भी एहसासात हैं, उसकी भी जरूरियात हैं, वो गलती भी कर सकता है। हमने ये क्यों जान लिया कि एक शख्स जो है वो गलती से मावरा है, तो वो शाह सवारी होते हैं जो मैदान जंग में गिरते हैं। तो याद रखिएगा कि इमोशंस एंड एक्सपीरियंसेस भी इसी तरह हमें समझने होंगे, हमें जानने होंगे लीडर के साथ क्या वाबस्ता है, फॉलोअर्स के साथ क्या वाबस्ता है, और उन दोनों के इन इमोशंस एंड एक्सपीरियंसेस में जो कोर कॉन्फ्लिक्चुअल रिलेशनशिप थीम्स एस्टैब्लिश कर रहे हैं, उन सबको हम टैकल वो कैसे कर सकते हैं। इसी बात को एक स्टेप आगे और चलाने के लिए लेट्स टॉक अबाउट द जोहारी विंडो as it was presented by Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingham, and they came up with the idea कि एक आप हो और एक आपके सामने दूसरा शख्स है। वो कोई भी हो सकता है, वो आपके फॉलोअर्स हो सकते हैं, वो आपका प्राइमरी केयर गिवर हो सकता है, वो कोई भी कंसर्न फेलो, आपका स्टेक होल्डर हो सकता है 360 डिग्री इवैल्यूएशन ऑफ कंसर्न्स में। अब आपको ये देखना है कि देयर आर सर्टेन थिंग्स इन योर लाइफ विच यू नो and there are certain things in your life which you don't know, and at the same time there are certain things in life which others know about you, and there are certain things in life which others don't know about you. अब इन चार कंसर्न्स को मिलाकर हमारे पास ये जोहारी विंडो का कॉन्सेप्ट आता है। और जोहारी विंडो में which is basically this name is also referring to the Joseph and Harrington concern, उसमें उन्होंने ये बताया कि when something is known to you and when something is known to others, that is the open self. When something is not known to you but known to others, that is the blind self, जिसको अभी हमने पिछली स्लाइड के ऊपर ब्लाइंड स्पॉट्स के नाम से जाना। सो वी हैव टू बी वेरी मच केयरफुल कि हमारे ब्लाइंड स्पॉट्स जो हैं वो क्या है, बिकॉज ब्लाइंड स्पॉट्स आर द एरिया जिसमें हमें चीटिंग हो सकती है, जिसमें हमारी डिसेप्शन क्रिएट हो सकती है, जिसमें कि हम शॉर्टफॉल का शिकार हो सकते हैं व्हाइल अंडरस्टैंडिंग अदर्स। Likewise, there are certain things which are known to you. कुछ ऐसे सीक्रेट्स ऑफ लाइफ भी हैं जो आपको पता है जिंदगी के बारे में, अपने बारे में, लेकिन दूसरे उस बारे में नहीं जानते. So that is the hidden self. That is another window which is opening into your life, opening into your psychology, opening into your concern, opening into your unconscious and subconscious and conscious concerns. लेकिन others are not much aware about it. So that is your hidden self. And there is yet another thing which is not yet explored either by you or by others, and that is unknown self. और वो unknown self के ऊपर हम अपनी ज्यादा तवज्जो, ज्यादा बहस भी नहीं रख सकेंगे, because that is obviously unknown to me and unknown to you. अब कोशिश हमेशा ये होती है व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन द लीडर एंड फॉलोअर, कोशिश हमारी हमेशा ये होगी कि हम इस ओपन सेल्फ कंसर्न को ज्यादा से ज्यादा बढ़ा सकें, ज्यादा से ज्यादा डोमिनेट करवा सकें, ज्यादा से ज्यादा एक्सप्रेसिव बना सकें, ताकि हमारे लाइफ के जो ब्लाइंड स्पॉट्स हैं और जो हिडन सेल्फ एस्पेक्ट्स हैं वो ओवरकम हो सकें। अब इस सारी बात को अगर हम एसोसिएट करें एक लीडरशिप कंसर्न के साथ, तो उसके लिए हमारे पास एक बड़ा अहम डिस्कशन है। तवज्जो से देखिएगा, तवज्जो से सुनिएगा, एंड देन वी विल बी टॉकिंग अबाउट मोर साइकोडायनामिक एस्पेक्ट्स डिस्कस्ड इन द आर्टिकल।
Hi, I'm Scott Patchen, and I'm going to introduce you to the Johari Window. I will show you how to have easier, more honest, and more productive conversations with your team using the Johari Window. Performance happens because the relationships leaders develop with their teams. The foundations of those relationships are honest conversations. So if that is your goal as a leader, where do you start? A tool I use to provide a lens for our conversations is the Johari Window. The Johari Window was created by Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingham in 1955. Its intent was to be a tool to help better understand the relationship between self and others. Let me give you a quick explanation of the Johari Window, and let's use this conversation as an example. When I meet someone, there are two dimensions of information: what I know and don't know about myself, and what others know and don't know about me. So when we bring these two dimensions together, there are things I know about me and things others know about me, and we call those open. Even in this conversation, there are things you already know about me: my name, the color of my hair. There are also things I know about me and others do not know. We call these things hidden. So you just met me, and details about my family, my education, whether I'm having a good or bad day are still hidden from you. Finally, there are things I don't know about me that others do. These are called blind spots. A great prop for this area is a mirror. When we look into a mirror, we get a different perspective of ourselves. When we engage into a relationship with others, they provide us a different perspective through feedback. There's also one area where I don't know and others don't know, and that's called unknown. And that's kind of a therapy region and something we're not going to talk about today. So let's apply this to your role as a leader. In honest conversations, the important information ends up in the open area. Here are 2 tips for moving things into the open area. For tip number 1, let's focus on moving things from hidden to open. A statement I hear from leaders is, why does it matter to me as a leader? I have work to do. Well, if your team does not know what your priorities or concerns are, what will they do? They will guess. You might as well hand them a magic 8-ball. If the question from your team is, what's our sales goal for next quarter? The answer from the magic 8-ball, better not tell you now. If performance is your goal, that's not going to work. So tip number 1, make time to answer those 2 questions for your teams when you meet. And the 2 questions are, what are my top 2 priorities this week or month? And what is keeping me up at night? The benefit? Well, a 30-year leadership veteran shared with me that when he shared the things that were keeping him up at night, often someone on his team would come forward and help him solve it. When people know what is on your mind, you provide them with an opportunity to help. Tip number 2, moving from blind spot to open. Remember, to get this kind of feedback requires safety and trust. It also takes courage from you to ask and from others to answer. So the key is to intentionally create the right space for this conversation. I recommend making time for frequent one-on-one conversations with each individual that reports to you. And when you meet, end your meeting by asking for feedback using these questions. What things do I need to keep doing? What things do I need to start doing? And what things do I need to stop doing? And then listen. A leader shared a story with me that when they asked this question, they were told to keep calling just to say hello and thank you for a job well done. He had done this randomly the previous week, and it was a blind spot for him because he didn't know it mattered so much. He does it more now. If you're a leader and this topic of honest conversation resonates with you, I invite you to watch my follow-up video where I provide more tips. I also invite you to send me questions or tips that you would be willing to share with other leaders.
Okay, I would definitely refer you that you may visit this truegroup.com and you can have the more leadership concerns with a person who is demonstrating us the Johari window. So I have just selected this clip to elaborate to you that how the follower-leader relationship can have the blind spots, can have the hidden spots, can have the open areas of discussion. So हमें कोशिश ये करनी है कि we should be increasing and enhancing the open concerns. The next topic, which was discussed in the article, is related to the psychodynamic concepts, an overview, a broader stage, the interaction of leaders and followers. और यहाँ पर एक बहुत खूबसूरत बात मुझे पढ़ने को मिली और समझने को मिली, and I was actually fascinated by this sentence, and that was related to the mirroring and idealizing concept. And the concept was that the first mirror in your life from the start of your existence is basically your mother's face, जिसमें के उस माँ के चेहरे में आप अपना अक्स देखते हो, because the first time when the baby opens his or her eyes, so obviously the most primary caregiver the person is witnessing is the face of the mother. Okay? और वो उसके लिए एक मिरर का रोल अदा करता है जिसमें कि वो बच्चा अपनी शख्सियत का अक्स वो देख पाता है. और उस माँ के उस चेहरे के अक्स के बाद द सेकेंड पर्सन जो उसकी लाइफ में प्राइमरी केयर गिवर और सबसे ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट बनता है, दैट पर्सन इज गोइंग टू बी द लीडर. सो दिस was actually a wonderful expression that the first mirror is the mother's face and the second is the leader. और अब हम क्या करते हैं, we idealize people important to us. हम उनको आइडियलाइज कर लेते हैं, हम उनकी जात में अपना वजूद ढूंढते हैं, हम उनके होने में अपनी जो है वो शख्सियत को तलाश करते हैं, हम उनके अंदर अपने आप को, अपने प्रॉब्लम्स को, उनका सोल्यूशन वो देख पाते हैं. सो बेसिकली जब हम एक लीडर को आइडियलाइज कर रहे होते हैं तो उस लीडर के कंसर्न में हमारा जो मोटिव होगा वो बेसिकली ये होता है कि शायद अब ये वो मसीहा है जो कि हमें अब पार लगाएगा. सो अब उस मकसद के तहत जब हम उसको आइडियलाइज कर लेंगे तो बहुत सा रियलिज्म जो उसकी जात के साथ वाबस्ता है अक्सर औकात वो हमसे या ओवर एस्टिमेट हो जाएगा, और अगर हम गलती पर हुए तो हमसे अंडर एस्टिमेट हो जाएगा। सो आइदर केस, ना हमें खुद अपनी जात में ओवर कॉन्फिडेंट होना चाहिए, ना हमें अपनी जात में इंफीरियरिटी कॉम्प्लेक्स का शिकार होना चाहिए। सेम इज द केस, ना लीडर को हमें बहुत ज्यादा आइडियलाइज कर लेना चाहिए और ना लीडर को हमें बहुत ज्यादा unreliable, untrustworthy वो समझना चाहिए। बेसिकली व्हाट वी हैव टू फॉलो अ बैलेंस्ड अप्रोच, और उस बैलेंस्ड अप्रोच को जानने के लिए हमारे लिए जरूरी है कि हम चीजों को सिस्टमैटिकली वो एवेल्युएट करें, और उस सिस्टमैटिक एनालिसिस में वी शुड बी एबल टू use the psychodynamic perspectives to understand what's actually going on in our relationships, हमारे ताल्लुकात में, हमारे मामलात में वो दरअसल क्या फिनोमेना है which is taking the shape। इसी पूरी जुस्तजू के अंदर sometimes the leader or the followers, it can be an either way situation, there is another happening which can take place, and that is that the people would become narcissist। उनके अंदर जो नार्सिज्म का कॉन्सेप्ट है वो डेवलप कर जाएगा, which is actually meaning related to the self interest to self absorption। अब उस self interest to self absorption phenomena के अंदर when the narcissism is taking place, there can be two further associated phenomena। One is constructive narcissism, which can result into establishment and development of self-esteem, to remain supportive, to remain balanced, to remain empathetic. And there can be a reactive narcissism, which is talking about focusing upon your own power, talking about your own status, always suffering from superiority complex or involved in the power games। अब हमें यह भी देखना पड़ेगा कि कहीं पर लीडर नार्सिज्म का शिकार तो नहीं हो रहा है, कहीं पर उन फॉलोअर्स में से कोई शख्स नार्सिज्म का शिकार तो नहीं हो रहा, और अगर उनमें नार्सिज्म किसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में एस्टैब्लिश हो भी रहा है तो आइदर इट इज कंस्ट्रक्टिव और रिएक्टिव, और कहां पर उसको किस किस्म की थेरेपी की जरूरत है, जिस थेरेपी से गुजरकर वो शायद अपनी जात के अंदर पाए जाने वाले कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स को, अपने जात के अंदर पाए जाने वाले कॉम्प्लेक्सेस को वो ओवरकम कर सके। Same is the case we talk and discussed in this particular concept, जिसमें कि हम बात कर रहे हैं identification with the aggressor। And when we talk about identification with the aggressor, who is actually a leader, तो उस कंसर्न में फॉलोअर्स क्या करते हैं, to avoid aggression people tend to be the same, कि रादर देन कि वो उस लीडर के साथ किसी कॉन्फ्लिक्ट में आए, व्हाट दे डू कि वो उसके एग्रेशन को, वो उसके उस इन्फ्लुएंस को, वो उसकी उस पावर को एक्सेप्ट करते हुए उसी जैसा बन जाने की कोशिश में मुब्तला वो हो जाते हैं, विच वुड इवेंचुअली कॉज couple of compromises rather than adjustments, rather than collaboration, rather than having any other positive concern. The people undergo the phenomena of compromise, which would definitely create the amount of regret in their life। अब उस वजह से नतीजा क्या निकलेगा, इसको हम लीडरशिप के थ्योरीज में भी कॉन्सेप्ट को पढ़ा था कि देयर वुड बी एवोल्यूशन ऑफ टू ग्रुप्स। वन वुड बी द इन ग्रुप्स जो कि उस जैसे बन गए, एंड वन वुड बी द आउट ग्रुप्स जो उस जैसे नहीं बन पाए। नतीजा क्या निकलेगा, द नतीजा वुड बी कन्फ्लिक्ट। यहां पर हमारा सेशन टाइम खत्म हो रहा है। इंशाल्लाह सी यू आफ्टर द ब्रेक।